So good morning. I'm happy to introduce our first set of panelists. First among them is Andy Malcolm, who's the owner of Footsteps Post-Production Sound in Canada, also an Emmy Award winning Foley, Foley artist who's worked on many feature films and television shows, including the Tim Burton Alice films. Thank you for pointing out there which one which one is which there. He's a long-term member of the Lewis Carroll Society and is currently publishing books on Carroll with his panelist partner George Walker at Cheshire Cat Press in Toronto. In 2005, Andy produced a film titled Sincerely Yours, a film about Lewis Carroll, and is currently producing a documentary entitled There's Something About Alice. Also joining them on the panel is Brian Sibley, who's president of the UK Lewis Carroll Society, which he's been a member for more than 50 years, also a member of the Lewis Carroll Society of North America. He's a writer and dramatist and broadcaster who's been responsible for radio features and documentaries and weekly programs. His dramatizations have included Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, Once and Future King, stories by Ray Bradbury, and the award-winning Gormenghast novels, and also known for his biographies of C.S. Lewis, Audrey, and Peter Jackson. And finally, George Walker is an award-winning engraver, book artist, author, and associate professor at the University of Toronto. His artworks are in many international collections, including the Fisher Rare Book Library at the University of Toronto, the Morgan Library Museum, and the Museum of Modern Art. He illustrated the first Canadian edition of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass, published by the Cheshire Cat Press. So please join us, or please join me, all of us, welcoming Andy Malcolm, Brian Sibley, and George Walker.
Thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Linda, for that great intro and prelude. But thank you, Hugh. Just one correction: I am not an associate professor at the University of Toronto. I am, however, an associate professor at the Ontario College of Art and Design University here in Toronto. So just a slight correction. I don't want people from the University of Toronto saying, I've never seen him in the halls, I don't know who he is. Anyways.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah, that's okay. It's just okay. It's fine. You just elevated me. I probably would get a pay raise. But anyways, Andy and I have started in on the Guinness. And I thought, and I already passed this to Brian, that we should start with a poem. In my youth, said the sage, I took to the Guinness, and I argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength that it gave to my constitution has lasted the rest of my life. And so therefore, cheers. Andy's going to give us a rundown of what we're going to do in the studio today. Welcome to the studio. This is the one thing that's the biggest advantage of doing a Zoom, is that we can have you right here in our homes, and we can be having Brian here in the studio with us, and he doesn't have to cross the big pond in order to be here. He can be sitting right beside us, and we certainly enjoy his company. And anyways, Andy, can you give him a rundown of what we're going to be doing here?
So it looks like George has already done the intro. What we're going to do is deal with the process of making the book, and Brian will talk more about the contents of the book. And I just wanted to point out this book to everybody. This is Brian Sibley's book from the 80s, all about Guinness advertising. It's one of the motivators that got us going on this project. And not only did Brian write the most definitive book on Guinness advertising, but he is also president, as was mentioned, of the Lewis Carroll Society. So what better person to write the introduction to Alice's Adventures in Guinness?
So true. And I thought what we'd do, Brian, is we'd start off, but I'm going to try and share our screen, because I've got page spreads of the Guinness book, and then maybe you can speak to these page spreads. I'm going to see if I can do this, see if it works. Sometimes the technology is fine, and others it's not. Can we see the page spreads of the Guinness book, my friends?
Yes. Yes, we're good.
Excellent. Brian, maybe you want to make some comments on this.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm sorry, I was trying to blunder in to say hi to everybody and hi to my two colleagues, who obviously have already had several cans of Guinness before we got started. I'm sadly still on the tea, because it's a bit early here in London, but I have got that famous tea party behind me rather, virtually, and on that page, it happens to be one of the early ads that Guinness produced, which features Alice and her companions, who are, of course, at a tea table. So, so there they are. As the title page shows, 1929 was when it all started, and it seems surprising, perhaps, because Guinness is such an old firm that had been around for already, 100 years, that Guinness only decided to advertise in 1929, by which time the world was already well acquainted with advertising. But it was in 1929, and Guinness started with a very modest advert. Well, it wasn't modest, it was rather proud, because it said, "This is the very first advert for Guinness." Bit of a show off, really. But the book is full. Just to show you here, the illustration you just saw was oh, this is, let's talk about this one. This is the first of the posters to feature Guinness, and it seems slightly unlikely. Why, and we'll come back to it, I'm sure, in questions, why on earth did a company like Guinness, producing beer, stout, why did they decide to turn to Lewis Carroll, which obviously today would be something that no advertiser would ever recommend to their client to do? But this advert says it all, really. The Walrus and the Carpenter were walking down the Strand. The Strand, of course, is an important street in London, and all the little oysters came and followed hand in hand. "If we had but some Guinness now," they said, "it would be grand. If 7 men with 7 tongues talked all till they were blue, could they give all the reasons why Guinness is good for you? I doubt it's in the Carpenter, but that it's good is true." And this was a very popular food combination, Guinness and oysters. It was, at the time, oysters were very, very cheap. They were the poor man's meal, really. Today they're a luxury for most of us, but then they were the food that poor people had. So having a glass of stout, dark beer, and a few oysters would be a cheap meal for a working man. And so that's how it just began, sort of as a coincidence. They thought, let's link up the idea of Guinness and oysters, and what better to do than to turn to the Walrus and the Carpenter. So, yeah, well, here's a classic one. Well, 2 classics, actually. The first one I'll mention is on the right, which is The Voice of the Lobster. And this was the first colour advertisement ever published in a British newspaper. Of course, it's pretty much only 2 colours, red and black, but it does have that significance that it was the first ad to appear on a newspaper in Britain in colour. And on the other side, this is an important illustration, really, because the artist of the illustration on the left-hand page is a man called John Gilroy, who was a very successful advertising artist, and he was the person who really shaped the look of Guinness advertising. Well, not just to do with Alice, but Guinness advertising generally. He was far and away the most prolific of the artists that they employed, and this advert, which is about Guinness having off with its head, but of course the important thing about Guinness as a drink is that it keeps its head, the white foamy head, until the very end of you'll finish your drinking it. So it's nonsense, says Alice, because Guinness keeps its head. And this was probably, I think an iconic example.
Yeah, so wasn't it the Benson company that he was working for at the time that took the account? Yes. Arthur Benson and Company was a publicity promoting company for advertising. And if it seems surprising to people that these kind of advertisements anybody should have ever thought of using Alice in Wonderland and Looking Glass, I think there's 2 things to remember. One of them is just how well known Alice was at the time. I mean, we maybe it was even more, I think so, probably more well known as a book than it is even today. And if you look at references like its appearance in Sheriff's play Journey's End, or the use of it in the film Mrs. Miniver, for example, Alice was part of popular culture and was, of course, well known on both sides of the Atlantic, because very shortly after these adverts started, Alice Liddell goes to New York and is celebrated, and Alice becomes a very big news again in the States. I'll just point out the picture on the left, which ties in with another
well-known British concept, which is the concept of the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, in Loch Ness. And in this particular one, I think there had probably been another sighting of the Loch Ness Monster. It's been very quiet in Loch Ness for some years now. We haven't had many sightings, but at that point, stories were coming up most summers about the Loch Ness Monster. And here's a picture of the White Knight who's going with all his usual equipment to hunt the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. So they were very witty that they managed to keep up, social comment on things that were going on. And on the right-hand page, which David Schaefer would have loved, of course, because he loved things to do with the mouse's tail, and indeed produced a little book about it. Here's a parody on the mouse's tail, which actually uses the way of laying out the poem, and it is, of course, a parody as a poem.
Brian, I just have a quick comment. The term Guinness is good for you. What science did they use behind that, or was this just popular opinion? Now, I ask this because I'm drinking a Guinness, and I certainly don't want to die young.
Well, it won't be bad for you, George. That's the main thing. Well, unless you drink too much of it. But you are absolutely. It's a perfect question, because when they decided to go into advertising, Guinness thought, well, we have to do what today we would call market research. But back then, market research was really people going around pubs and saying to people, why do you drink Guinness? And people just sort of went, well, it's good for you, because in fact, it had always had this this reputation because of its content as being good, natural ingredients that were probably likely to be, well, not damaging to you, could possibly be health giving. And so when people said to them, their researchers, Guinness is good for you, well, they just decided that that's what they would do. And that's the line they came up with. And virtually all of their early advertising was a parody or a pastiche of that slogan, having got it established. And as you see here on Alice's evidence, the evidence at the end is that Guinness is good for you. So I think it was just one of those things that the idea of Guinness being healthful was already there. Doctors tended to recommend Guinness to mothers who had just given birth, for example. That was one of the common things, that if you just had a baby, you should have Guinness to build up your strength. It contained iron, and it was generally thought to be a great thing. I mean, as I say, as we were saying earlier, you wouldn't get away with advertising like this today. Possibly not. But,
I'm looking for that illustration of the strong man with the steel girdle. Ah, here it is.
It's one coming up now.
Yes, because of course it wasn't just good for you. It made you stronger. It made you a man. For God's sake.
Absolutely gave you strength. And one of the early these advertisements were coming out pretty much around the time that Alice was coming out, but they became a major theme. There were 3 or 4 major themes in Guinness's advertising. One of them was that it was good for you, the other that it gave you strength. And there was a whole series of advertisements which they're not all shown in our book, for the simple reason that Alice doesn't feature in most of them, but she does in this one. And the idea was that the various people, it could be a stevedore, it could be a costermonger in the London markets with a pile of high baskets piled up on his head, or here a workman who's clearly carrying an impossible object, which is a great long girder. The thing about these posters, apart from the idea behind it, you can be so strong you could actually carry a girder, was that, as you can see, even in the small form, we should say that all of these illustrations were actually illustrations that appeared in magazines, newspapers, and so on. But there were much larger versions that were put up on poster boards, billboards, and Guinness, and particularly Gilroy, had this principle that you had to be able to instantly read what the image was. So unlike these images, for example, the one with the girder is an image which actually stands out. You can read it immediately. You can absolutely see. what it was. While we're just going past these particularly elaborate illustrations, which were not really used in posters, they were mostly designed either for magazines or well, mostly for magazines because of the color and the elaborate artwork. But they also constituted part of a series of booklets that Guinness produced, essentially just as an enticement to the medical profession to recommend Guinness. They were called they were referred to as the doctor's booklets. And the artist is a man called Anthony Groves Rains, and a very fine illustrator. And as you can see by the intricate detail of these aren't simply the kind of basic clear images of Gilroy's main advertising. These are very elaborate pieces of illustrative art, and these would have appeared in magazines like, well, this one here is the Illustrated London News, the Sphere, popular magazines of the day, and would have occupied a whole page of a large magazine. And you know, they refined an image which was very popular on posters and in the newspapers, and were quite clearly something which people would want to keep. And those doctors' booklets, which went out every Christmas with these kind of a little booklet full of all of these. I mean, the one of the bottle and jug, or it's just disappeared. Bottle and jug. Can you go back, George? That one. Can you go back?
This one here. Bottle
No,
and jug.
Yeah, that one. If you look at the detailing in this, Anthony Groves Rains would take probably a year to create one of these booklets. And I'm not sure whether you can see it, but over the gate of the prison from which Hare is trying to escape, is across the top is the wording which we normally think of as being associated over the gates of hell in Dante, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Here it's a band of hope, all ye who enter here. But just look at the detailing, the windows on the side, which of course are shaped like a club. Down a bit, George. Yeah. There's little, hold it there. No. Anyway, there's two little eyes peeping out of the windows there, and you know the detailing there, you can see them, and the detailing of cobwebs and ivy around the door. It's just extraordinary piece of artwork. I mean, high-end illustrative art. So these, and the one, if you could just move to the other page, just for us to see, just to show how complex this is long before you could be creating images with computers and so on, that this aerial view or elevated view of a dinner party, a lunch party, you know, go back, George, because I want people to see the background. You go back. Pull out. And there, now hold it there. If you just look at the carpet pattern, this is before anybody could be creating something digitally and just reproducing it. This is the work of Anthony Groves Rains, and look at the detailing in the carpet and the perspective that he has to cope with at the same time, because he's looking at that carpet and the table and the chairs and everything at an angle. I mean, it's just a masterly piece of illustration. And I find it fascinating that, and of course, at the head of the table rather, the other end to Alice is a clock. And that was another one of Guinness's constant themes, which was it's always time for a Guinness, you know, and Guinness time became a concept in itself. It's always time for a Guinness. Any time's good for a Guinness. So a brilliant artist who I think took the very slightly primitive, let's be fair about it, early illustrations and carried them through to something really sophisticated. This would have been in the 1950s. I think it's 54. They would have, you know, they matched the period of change. But how extraordinary that these concepts lasted from 1929, you know, just on the edge of 1930s, and they were still going up until the 1950s, and people were still reading these illustrations and having a huge affection for them, you know, and the affection, I always think, I remember somebody saying to me, why would anybody have chosen to do this kind of stuff to promote a beer? And I always thought, well, it was very cunning, because if you saw these as a child, as I did, and fell in love with the artwork because I loved the Alice books, then by the time you come to the age where you might be wanting a drink, you will be very favorably disposed, or flavorably disposed, perhaps I should say, to try a Guinness. So, you know, there we are.
I'm not sure if this one was done by Gilroy, but
No. Anthony
not
Grove
the,
Rains, wasn't it?
but didn't Gilroy base the zookeeper on himself? Wasn't this a self-portrait?
Yeah.
But if he didn't
Yeah.
do this, then he must have, one of his associates must have.
Well, Anthony Gross Rains did this one, and by that time everybody knew that that's what the zookeeper looked like. We should say that the animals was another, apart from the animals in Alice, there was another whole range of Guinness advertising, and in these Alice ads we've been showing, you see all these coming together, the strong man, and particularly in the middle there is a toucan, and I think probably a lot of people will remember the toucan, because even long after they'd abandoned these styles of advertising, the toucan came back and was used as a concept, and it began with a rhyme which fable tells us was created by Dorothy L. Sayers, which was that if you can say as he can that Guinness is good for you, how good to be a toucan, just think what toucan do. So the toucan then led to a whole array of other animals. There's an ostrich, which you can see just poking out of the cage on the right, which was always depicted, or not there, but usually depicted with a Guinness glass stuck in its throat where it was trying to drink the Guinness, but got the glass stuck, as you know, we know ostriches gobble up anything, and lions and bears and all kinds of animals. And as you say, rightly say, George, Gilroy modelled the keeper on himself. So even when another artist like Groves Rains was making this advertisement, the keeper would still look like John Gilroy.
I'll move along here.
Oh, wait, go to the Guinness.
If there's a page, Brian, just tell me and I can jump to it if you recall.
There's a bit of a delay, so
Yeah,
when we
there's a
move
lag.
it, we're losing.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah. Well, let's just pause here for a moment, because this demonstrates just how wide. I mean, can you go back slightly, George, to the one you've just had?
Yeah.
This one?
There we are. Yeah, this is the last advertisement on the right, the colour advertisement, which features Alice, and the lobster, the red lobster there is obviously shown.
Sorry, here we are.
No, we are. No, not quite. No, next one.
No, that's
Well,
the
anyway.
one.
Is it there now? Sorry, there's a lag. So 'tis the choice of the gourmet is the one I've got up.
Okay, no, but there's a later photograph which you have just gone by, which is the lobster showing in a photograph of a lobster, not this drawn lobster, but a photographic lobster.
Oh,
and
'tis
that
the
was
choice of the lobster, and the lobster's holding the Guinness on page
yeah,
81.
yeah, hold it there. This was the very last illustration which appeared on and you can see it's 1950. I think it's 59 or something like that. You know, I mean, it's surprisingly late. I mean, really, 30 years from when they first started this. And it's a photographic illustration. It's not drawn by anybody, although the glass has been obviously planted in. And it's significant for two reasons. One, it's the last one which had any reference to Lewis Carroll in it, but it's also an early illustration, which was a photographic illustration when advertising art was moving away from line illustration or colored illustrations to photographic pictures. It's rather dull, really, but it is the last one. But on the page facing it, and this is just an interesting kind of indication of just how Guinness were able to apply their advertising idea and the Guinness and Alice ideas to anything they wanted to turn their hand to. There was an amalgamation between two companies, both significantly well-known people, one of them Guinness and the other a company called Callard and Bowser, which was a sweet manufacturer, particularly known for their butterscotch. And here we see the Walrus showing that he's combining both Guinness and butterscotch. It wasn't butterscotch that was flavored with Guinness, you understand, but the two companies had amalgamated, and they even managed to use Alice to point out the fact that these two well-known household brands had amalgamated and become part of one organization. You know, quite remarkably different, because one was obviously a sweet and one was an alcohol. But you know, here we are this is 1958, and so I think a little while after the actual amalgamation. But how bizarre it seems now that one would have ever thought of using a child to be involved in promoting a drink. I think if you could just go forward from where you are, George, the final advertisement, which it wasn't part of the series, but here we are in 1965, marking the anniversary, it's July the 3rd, marking the fact of the birth of the Alice stories. Guinness put out this advertisement, and this advertisement doesn't really say very much in promotion of Guinness, although the hatter at the bottom is running away with a glass of Guinness instead of a cup of tea, and Alice has a Guinness drink me bottle. But they are honouring the fact that for so many years, Guinness advertising had always been, Alice had always been part of Guinness advertising. And it was just a recognition long after these adverts would have been really appropriate to have in the media. I mean, even then it would have been not appropriate. That this beginning, this gift of Lewis Carroll's of Alice in Wonderland, as they put it, which was also a gift which was to them as a publicist, and that's their last kind of acknowledgement. And well, that is, I think George, that's our last illustration in the book, isn't it? And it is the reverse of the image which appeared at the front of the book. Here's this would have appeared on the back of, this is the inside back cover of one of the doctor's booklets, and there's the outside back cover. And one of the things that Groves Rains created in his cover illustrations for those books is the whole ability that the book becomes somehow works both ways. So this was a book called Alice Aforethought, and you can see through the back, through the window here, you see the glass under one of those Victorian domes, and then on the page inside, you're inside the Alice house, if you like, looking glass house, and you're seeing through the window out into the garden, and there is the drink me glass under the dome. And that's just one example of the way in which that particular artist, Groves Rains, made these books. I mean, if Groves Rains had ever he did do a few illustrated books for children, but if he had turned his hands to doing an Alice edition just of his own work, I think it would have been utterly wonderful. And I sort of regret the fact that he didn't. But our book, I think, memorializes particularly Gilroy and Anthony Groves Rains' work. But there are, it should be said, a lot of other artists in the book as well. And although not all represented in our book, it is the case that Guinness were very keen on adopting some of the best people who they could get. So, you know, there are artists such as John Nash and Gerard Hoffnung and Roland Emmett and Ronald Searle. All kinds of artists were eager to do illustrations for Guinness because the brand was so loved and the advertising was so loved. When they finally abandoned all these kind of type of advertising, the decision was taken, and I record in my book that Andy was showing you. Let me just mention this page while you're there, George, if you could just pause there for a second. 1951 was the year of the Festival of Britain, and that Festival of Britain was, of course, I don't know where you can go back to that one which showed the festival clock. Can you, George? Is that possible?
Yes, I'm there now.
Not quite. Anyway,
it should be there. Sorry, there's a lag, Brian. It'll be there in a second.
Yeah, there we are. Thank you. Yes. 1951 was the year of the Festival of Britain. This illustration on the left is, I was mentioning lots of other illustrators, and these two posters actually feature illustrators other than the people we've been talking about. The one on the left, and many of you will know of his work both from as an advertising artist but also as an illustrator, Eric Fraser.
Oh, right.
1951 was the year of the the year of the Festival of Britain, which was itself, of course, 100 years on from the Great Exhibition of 1851, and it saw a lot of attractions built in London. It was really the regeneration of the British Isles after the Second World War. And Fraser on the left there has this poster in Festival Land, but actually, oddly, it's one of the few poems or parody verses that appear, which is actually based on a poem from Sylvia and Bruno, not from one of the Wonderland poems at all, but all the usual characters are there. And the Guinness head at the bottom, as you can see, is the famous smiling face, which was another reinforcement of the good for you idea. And before it goes, on the right, there's the Guinness face. And on the facing page to this, the artist is an artist called Lewis Him, or a pair of artists called Lewis Him, who created this clock. In fact, at a previous LCS North American meeting, Catherine Richards, gave a talk about the 1950s and the war, Alice at War, and she referred to this particular object, which was a traveling clock. This is just a painting, but this was a traveling clock that appeared first of all at the Festival of Britain in London at Battersea Park, and then toured the country, going to seaside venues like Blackpool and Bargate and Ramsgate and Brighton and places on the south coast. And every 15 minutes, this clock would animate. This shows it at its full open extent. So things would happen. The sun would start to spin. The ostrich would pop out of the chimney. The doors would open, and the Guinness toucans were seen pecking the words "Guinness is good for you" onto the tree that was inside the house. And this sort of carousel on top went round, and the hatter appears on the left hand side, fishing, with the fishes sort of coming up and up and up. You can just see the hatter there, and Alice drawn in at the bottom of the poster, who's just watching the hatter do his fishing. So, you know, right up until we're on the brink of the 1960s, and a whole change in society and life in Britain, well, all over the world, of course, but particularly in the UK, we think of the 60s as being a year of a decade of great change. Guinness was still using, you know, these ideas. Yeah, have a Guinness when you're tired. I could do with one now. Bung one over.
So it is good for your health, is what you're saying.
Absolutely, certainly.
And of course, here's Gilroy again. You know, it's not him.
Anthony Groves Rains.
It's Groves Rains, but it's actually supposed to be a representation of him, I suspect.
Well, it's not neither Groves Rains or Gilroy actually, but the one on the face, this is the Kangaroo, which was another of the animal series, and I particularly like these cartoons because what Guinness was doing at this point was drawing together. This was an artist called John Hanna, but again, yes, you're absolutely right. He's following the style that Gilroy had absolutely established already. Although if you look at Alice on the left, and you can see just and the styling of the tree in the background, this is already a much looser 1950s style of illustration. You know, it's less detailed, it's more about the graphic line of the illustration. But the smile on the face of the Kangaroo, who of course steals the keeper's Guinness by putting it in her pouch, whereas in fact substituting the Joey's into the keeper's apron while she hops off with his two bottles of Guinness. You know, it's just, I find it fascinating that even at that point, people looked at this advert and they saw something which was amusing and entertaining. The one on the right is by Gilroy, and it features that ostrich with the glass stuck in his neck. There was a great debate. People used to write into Guinness and say that this Guinness can't have been any good for that ostrich because it's stuck in his throat. And obviously, if the glass was in his throat that way up, because we can tell from that shape that is exactly how a glass would look if it was stuck in the neck of an ostrich, that the Guinness is still in the glass, and therefore it can't have been any good for him. And Gilroy, who in my other book, the book about Guinness advertising, I have a sketch of Gilroy having tried to draw the glass the other way up, so an upside down glass, if you like, which would have meant that the ostrich had absorbed the Guinness. He realized it didn't look like a glass because it was inverted. It looked rather like an old weight that would have been used on a set of scales. So Gilroy came up with the answer, which when people wrote in and complained, the advertising agency would write back and say, well, what happened was that the ostrich balanced the glass on its beak, threw the glass on, tossed the glass up into the air, caught the Guinness as it came down, as the glass tossed over. Guinness went down its throat, but because it didn't shut its beak quickly enough, the glass followed down and was still the right way up, but it was now an empty glass. So, you know, the public engaged with these adverts in this incredible way that, you know, anything that was changed. Wow. Worth pointing out that both these ads show Alice in a red dress. My friend Kira Vaclavic would point out that Alice didn't always have a blue dress, you know, as we normally assume from those coloured tenniels, and certainly from the Disney film and most other interpretations. But she had a red dress, and in fact Gilroy drew her with a red dress, a white and yellow dress, a green dress, and a blue dress. But Alice isn't always the little girl in blue, and here she is, absolutely styled after Tenniel, of course. Both these artists are showing us an Alice which is based on Tenniel's original, but in this series she had a red dress, maybe because it, you know, set her out against the other imagery. The sea lion was another Guinness animal, and there's the toucan on the right, which is actually teaching Alice about how two Guinnesses are good for you. But the essence of these ads was the wittiness of the puns. I mean, even the title of that one, you know, a too candid friend. You know, there's so much wit in these ads that they. I think everybody was just delighted by them. They loved the idea, they loved the association with Alice, and it all seemed very innocent. I think it was innocent. I don't think there was any underlying thing of people saying, well, what we'll do is we'll use Alice and, you know, infiltrate the idea of Guinness into children's minds. That certainly wasn't the case. But we lived in a slightly more innocent time, you know, and when people did think that a drink could do you good, and didn't think it mattered if you were associated with other things that we liked and made us happy and amused. The toucan, yes.
Oh, sorry. I was going to bring up the Alice in Snowland. Here, Snowman's Land, and here she seems to have sort of a reddish dress. We just see the skirt in this, but it's in a completely different style than what we're used to.
Yeah, she's actually in a kind of version of the Looking Glass costume, which Alice wears when she's on only in one illustration, when she's on the railway journey through Looking Glass, which we know was sort of loosely or partly inspired by Millet's the first sermon, and so she's got a muff and she's got a much more pleated dress, and is wearing striped stockings, obviously Looking Glass gear, and clearly Victorian boots, a child's boots, it's a reversed image of the one in the Tenniel illustration of the guard looking through the window of the railway carriage. But yes, they've drawn on that image to show her quizzing the hatter there. But, you know, again, there's so much detail in that one illustration, and that gives you an idea of just how these artists interpreted these pictures and made them something that you would linger over. And I suspect a lot of people, I don't know whether when you guys were putting the book together, you've got some of the illustrations you use from pulls from magazines that were being offered for sale, but I've seen these pictures being, you know, taken by booksellers where they've removed it from the color magazine, because quite often these elaborate magazines didn't have print on the back side of the image that was there, and having them framed up. You know, people appreciate them as art pieces in their own right.
Just so many interesting takes on the Alice story, and lots of liberty taken too, which makes it so much
yes,
fun.
Plenty of liberty, yes, absolutely.
So do we want to show some?
So if you like, Brian, what we were thinking of doing was also taking them around the studio, our guests, and also talking a bit about some of the technical challenges that we face in reproducing these wonderful images, because certainly there were lots of technical challenges. And as we've said in the past, we only make 42 books. For you Carolinians would know the reason why we chose 42, because of the significance of the number. We only make 42 copies of any of our books, and that's why they are immediately rare. And and we pride ourselves in that number.
And we don't worry about copyright and getting sued.
Andy had blah, 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 blah. Andy, of course, is incorrect. We are certainly worried about copyright. And we would just like to say that a copy of the Guinness books is indeed in the hands of a Guinness family member. Is that not
That's
true,
right.
sir? Yes.
Sebastian Guinness.
Sebastian Guinness has a copy of this book, and if he wants to pursue legal action, we would say, sir, let us sit down with the Guinness and discuss this like civilized people, if you don't mind. To move on.
Just to add there, George, while you get geared up to take people around, you're absolutely, that's the perfect way out if that's what happens, because there was a point very early on when Guinness omitted to ask Macmillan's permission. They probably hadn't realised that these weren't, as one would have supposed, in the public arena. Macmillan were a bit miffed initially at finding that their characters were turning up in advertising and Tenniel's art was being copied or reproduced. And there were, shall we say, strong conversations, but it's said in Guinness legend anyway, that the whole thing was settled very amicably over a crate or two of Guinness in Macmillan's offices. And thereafter, they often added in the early ads with acknowledgements, obviously itself a Carolian type word, acknowledgements to Macmillan and Company. And I think Macmillan realized that the added publicity which it gave to their books and their characters actually did them no harm whatsoever. And from there on, it was a very happy marriage. So that's the line to take if
Yes.
If Mr. Guinness comes after.
I'm with you. And isn't it true that how they got the doctors on board was, of course, they said, Guinness is good for you. You'll have to admit, here's a case of Guinness. You can try it out and try it on your patients. And those who come back with a positive result will obviously prove the science. Wasn't there something like that involved there, or am I making that up?
Oh, no, you're not making that up. Doctors did prescribe Guinness to women after childbirth, and they asked doctors, if you'd like to send us testimonials, which they did, which appear in none of the ads in this book, but there are ads where a doctor writes, that Mrs. Sproggins of 43 Tolgee Lane felt absolutely revitalized after a glass of Guinness. That they would then, some of the doctors would write and say, well, I don't know about our patients, but I could do with a bit of Guinness as well. And they would usually get a pack or so of Guinness.
It's great.
So,
it sounds like a terrible pickup line, doesn't it, Brian? It's like you say, oh dear, you should have a Guinness because it's good for you. The ladies are taking it now, and if you want to be well, then if you have lots of complaints, and the Guinness will do you right.
I think Andy's got the Guinness booklets there, which so you can see the size of them.
These are the doctor's booklets, which I think are dearly priced now.
They are dearly priced, and they're not just Alice. I mentioned some of those artists. There's one illustrated by John Nash. There's one by Hoffnung, by Roland Emmett, and a lot of other popular artists. And each one of these was very much even a collector's item in their day. I saw the one that I think, that's the one with the very elaborate, the one that Andy was just holding is the one with the very elaborate trompe-l'oeil cover. That one, which shows a house of cards with Alice and the characters on a house of cards looking through from the front, and then on the back shows the bellman looking in from the other side. And if you then open the inside of the book, the front first page, front inside cover is the reverse of that image. So you can see Alice looking in between the cards, and right at the back you can see the bellman peeping in through the cards on the back cover. I mean, a beautiful piece of art, which is worthy of any trompe-l'oeil artist like Rex Whistler, for example.
Yes. Fabulous. And our challenge was to try to create the richness of color. And they were using a technique called flat color, which we don't use anymore in trying to reproduce some of these fabulous colors in here. So that our challenge was to try to get those colors to match them so that the quality would be the same as what we're seeing in these these doctors' books. And one of the challenges, of course, was that the paper aged slightly, and the paper has a hue, and we had to remove that hue from the file, otherwise it would impact the color and the richness of it. And the paper that we were printing on had a buff color to it. And so what we wanted to do was make sure that if we removed the paper color, we would have, in fact, a similar color to what the printers of the time were using. And so that took a lot of calibration, should we say, not just on the computer monitor and but the printer that we were using, and press that you can see in the background here required that we be very aware of those color ranges that we needed to stay within. And so that was exciting for us as Andy and I get together every Friday to play with these problems that are a real challenge, but also a lot of fun to try to solve. And we thought what might be nice is to take you through some of these issues that we were dealing with. And I just have to change. I have to go into Zoom and change which camera we're using, because Andy is actually going to take the laptop and move around, because we thought it would be fun to show you how we do the foil, because what you can't see on the screen in the Guinness book is that the title page, we actually use gold foil because, of course, things like this don't reproduce well because they're so reflective. And gold, of course, appears as a yellow when seen using transmissive color, which is what you're looking at right now, as opposed to reflective color. And we just wanted to show you a bit of how we achieve some of these interesting effects. So here I'm going to
end up doing was having brass plates made. I don't know if you can see that okay. And we had where the original illustration was, we what do you call it when you stamp it? We embossed it.
Yeah, we blind embossed it. But if you look at the back, this is what we're going to show you today, is how we do the foil stamping. This is of course, the famous Irish harp. And so Andy's going to pick up the laptop and we're going to go over to the foil stamping press and take a look at how we do this process, which of course is all done by hand. And we're able to show you the plate that we had made, which is a small magnesium plate with the harp on it here. And you can see if we can
see if
down. Yeah, so there you can see the harp here, and we're going to use a gold foil, which you can see here. And I'm just going to foil stamp that onto a piece of black card so that you can actually see what that looks like. This is very, very hot, easy to burn yourself on. So we have to be very careful. And we need a little bit of luck involved in this too, because of course, no one knows for certain if it's going to be successful. So here we go. There we are. Okay. So there you can see the gold foil. Yeah, this is good, Andy. You can see the gold foil stamping that we did. And you can actually see the foil, how and this is a good sign that you can actually see through the foil, and you can see that wherever you can see through it, the foil is actually transferred to the material. This is the adhesive side, and this is the foil side that we all like, the shiny stuff, because of course it's shiny stuff that we're always attracted to, isn't it? Not just crows, Andy, not just crows. Many people are attracted to shiny and bright things, and why wouldn't they be? The other thing we wanted to show you is that we set up on the press here just a sample of the kind of fun that we have trying to create our Alice books by hand. And you can see I've locked up some typography here, Wonderland, and a wood engraving. So this is all wood and a little bit of lead from the next book we're working on. So we're going to just ink up this press.
And while George is inking that up, the Guinness book is the first book that we actually did black and white and color. So this is half of our operation here, and we have our Epson high-end printer at another location in the city. And
this is the old school way. And this, of course, is how we historically recreate our books, true to the same printing technologies that were available to the printers in the time of Carroll. Of course, this is a letterpress, and that's why stereotypes were made of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, because Macmillan suggested that it's so much work. And Andy, if you can just come over, you can see that this is a wood type here in the case. but it used to be that one would have to hand set all the type from individual pieces of type, and these would have to be locked together. And if you come over to the press, you can see some type locked up here, and you can imagine how expensive it would be to recreate this every time you wanted to print the book. So Macmillan rightly suggested to Carroll, hey, why don't you make stereotypes, which is when we make a cast of this, so we can pour metal in it and make a reproduction of the actual printing surface. And so this is a very useful technique, the stereotype, which of course psychology borrowed and for other purposes, as they do. And now I'm going to roll the ink. You can see I've just put ink on the press and it's rolling out here. We'll let it get kind of smooth, and then we can roll it over for the inking. And then Andy has cut us some paper so that we can run a proof, and then I'm going to show you. And hopefully the quality will be that we will like this, but we'll let Andy, who is one of his important jobs here is to make sure that I keep the quality up, that I don't cut corners, so to speak. So here I've got it on print, and now I'm going to make an impression. Ah, there we are. Oh, Andy, let's take a look at that. So here you can see I've just pulled this off the press, and let's take a look at the word Wonderland. Now there's some issues with that here. Take a look at the W and the O and the space. It looks like there's more space between the W and the O. And so this word needs letter spacing in order to read properly if we want this to be more legible in our mind, and also to be more pleasing. So one of the things that we could do is in letter space by adding thin spaces in between the letters, and this is indicative of letterpress. This is what has been lost in the computer technologies, which this can happen instantaneously, and including things like the ligatures, which happen so quickly on the computer, but which at one point the hand typesetter would have to find in the case. They'd have to find that FI, that FFL, and that CT and ST, which are just some of the ligatures, and I haven't even mentioned the ampersand, which of course is an E and a T. This engraving is from one of our new books that we're working on with Alison Tannenbaum. Just don't tell anyone that we're working on that too. But this is one of the characters in our new Snark. We're always working on different books. How many books do we have on the go right now, Andy?
We actually have 4 books on the go. Can you tell that George is a teacher? So
I don't know that anyone can teach anything. All we can do
So
is
maybe are we running over time? Should we take question and answers, or?
Yeah, I don't know.
You have about 15 minutes, so you're okay.
I can show you how we'll improve this. Then I'm going to actually now take this apart, and I've got some tiny little spaces, and I'm going to add some spaces in between the letters, some very, very thin spaces. These are exactly only 2 points. So in like a thick piece of card. And in some cases, I'll add a piece of tissue paper in the printing just to increase the pressure just that much by a few thousandths of an inch to improve the printing quality. And people are often surprised at how delicate and sensitive the press can be to a few thousandths of an inch in pressure. But truly, this is the case. And it's always, so what I'm going to do to solve the problem of the space between the W and the O, and that is increase the spaces between some of the other letters. And I may or may not be successful with this. So bear with me as I look at this and try to
between D and E and E and
D
R.
and E and E and R, maybe a little bit there. The A, and I don't have to because of the large space at the top here. And so I'm just going to try and space this out enough so that to give it more breathing room. And that's what we're really trying to do. And I have to also get it to work with my line measure. And of course, we work in the printer system of measurement, points and picas, and that's why I have this line gauge. Let me just check here. Our line measure for this particular page is 25 picas. And so I'm going to lock it back up. As I did this quickly, you can imagine that these are things that we take time with to consider their spacing.
Turn the water down. I think it's almost boiling.
The water's boiling?
Whose water is boiling?
My water isn't boiling. Is your water boiling, Andy? Anyways, now we're going to take a proof. And yes, have a cup of tea while we're printing. It's refreshing. And now we're going to take a look at the spacing. And there's still work to be done here. But you can see now that if we can compare it with the last one, you know, I've spaced out Wonderland again, and we're still going to need to work on that spacing. It's still a bit crowded in here. We need to give it some more air, maybe rearrange some of the spaces around here to get that to print beautifully. And these are the kind of considerations that we're constantly working with in the shop, not just for the interior pages, but the cover and the cover design. We're thinking about typography. We're thinking about the tone that typography leaves on the page, because a solid page of text, whether it's justified or flush left, actually has a tonal quality to it. If you stand back, it's like when you see dots in a halftone, if you put, it creates a gray. And so we're looking at those tones that the page creates, and to see how and if that competes with the illustrations, or whether we have to use a denser typeface or lighten up the image, so there's a balance there. So we're considering the balances within the design. We're considering whether the feel, the haptic qualities of the paper too. We're interested in whether those haptic or tactile qualities of the paper are working for us, because we're
there's going to be a question and answer.
Yes.
Sorry. No,
we're into touchy-feely
No,
stuff.
there's going to be a test.
And the test, it's only multiple choice, so you don't have to worry about that. We'll ask questions that you'll probably, and we'll post the answers on the interweb, or that thing where you're probably existing in right now. Anyways, we hope that you've liked what you've seen, and we're of course, because we only do 42 copies of anything, if you are interested in any of these books, the best thing to do is to email us directly. And we would like to take this moment also to thank, shouldn't we thank all of the wonderful people who have helped us from the Lewis Carroll Society, not just Brian Sibley.
On this one, especially Claire Imholtz.
Yes.
She's the researcher of researchers, and she helped us a lot on this particular book.
None of our publications would be possible without the expertise of the members of the society. We would just not be able to do it. Our brains are just not big enough. Andy has looked at a brain expansion, but apparently the science isn't there. Our hard drives are almost full, and we can only hope that in the future that we'll be able to expand them to be able to hold as much knowledge as our learned friends. And so
any questions?
Any questions, we are of course happy to answer them. And we're just so happy that you took interest in our press and the projects that we're doing, and sharing some time with Brian across the pond.
Well, I have a couple of comments, and one of them is I've certainly enjoyed the sparkling delivery of all of your talks on this. This was really very entertaining. I wanted to comment that there's no surprise that up there through the 60s they were calling Guinness good for you. I mean, that was the age of the good food candy bar from Mars, the Milky Way, after all.
Cigarettes were good for you too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that wonderful traveling clock looked like it would have fit in perfectly in the village from The Prisoner, which was also that same general time frame. And lastly, Brian, the rabbit ears sprouting from your head behind you remind me of what every person wants to do to everyone else who's getting their picture taken.
Well, absolutely. It is the March hare, not the rabbit, but and if I move my head very slightly that way, you can see I've also got straw in my hair, which points out that I'm absolutely mad, as of course was everybody at that tea party.
Excellent, Brian. I envy your madness.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about that.
You don't? You have your own madness?
I think we're all mad here, actually.
Really?
You're right.
This is Karen. One possible reason that red was used on Alice's dress is that in advertising, they will try to pick up from the product. And if you look at the Guinness label, the signature is in red.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful red. So that might be one reason for using that color on her.
Yes, good point. And also that's why the rubicators in the illuminated manuscripts use red. It's something our eye immediately goes to. It's like shiny stuff. You know, why do we use gold? It's because it's luminous.
And the use of red in the logo or the typeface was not accidental, because one of the concepts of when people describe Guinness, they said there's a ruby in every glass.
Yeah.
And in fact, in some of the illustrations, the early illustrations where Gilroy himself drew the drink, as opposed to it being a photograph of the glass, he would accentuate the fact of a deep redness within the heart of the
amber
brown state. So
color. Yeah,
so,
it's good stuff.
But it was only an occasional thing in these ads that Alice wore red, because, as I say, quite often she wore the more traditional blue, but Gilroy certainly used green, and quite often showed Alice in a white dress with a kind of yellow trim to it. But I think however it was used, it was always planned to be used in a way, as you rightly say, to draw your eye to the central character, and it obviously helped as well, because it locked in with a primary color in all their advertising, which was all the lettering of Guinness is good for you, and the primary colors that they used were always red. Well, green isn't a primary color, but their colors that they used were primarily red and green and black, and those were the three main colors that were used in all of their advertising. And brown, of course, because you had brown kangaroo, you had a brown bear, which fitted in with the zoo coloring, and brown, of course, being also part of the Guinness itself, the beer color. So it wasn't, those things were certainly, as you say, they were absolutely not accidental. But the fact that there was a freedom in those days to be able to use different artists to depict Alice, for example, the fact that there was a freedom to choose which colors you might depict those characters in is, I find, really interesting, because I'm sure that today every advertising company has its kind of its image book on which, that's what everybody bases everything on. I mean, if you go, Disney have, for example, and many other companies do the same, they have a prototype which any illustrator using the images would know which blue you use for Alice's dress, or which yellow you use for Donald Duck's beak, or whatever. So it was quite free. There was a freedom about the Guinness advertising which A.S. Benson used, which I think doesn't happen nowadays with the same way. But if you look at early advertising in the States too, I think there was that freedom with. And the use of being able to use graphic art, the Norman Rockwell, for example, and Rockwell and his contemporaries in American advertising, to use imagery which is illustrative imagery to promote something which is actually to do with pushing a product to people, but to do it through the subtle way of enticing the customer in with images that are graphic and pleasing. I'm not sure that's the prime objective nowadays with advertising, but it certainly was then.
Yes, and certainly so. Sorry, excuse me, but just to add on to that is that it's called branding, and it was an issue for us because the harp that's used in the Guinness logo has changed, and we had to decide, well, what harp are we going to put on the cover of this? Like, which one do you choose, and how do you choose which one? It's something that only someone who starts to look carefully at the history of the branding of a certain product will actually see those little details. And many brands do this too. They change their typography, they change the look, but they don't want to lose their audience by changing the brand too much. So there are certain things like color and form and shape and design that are consistent. But we know from advertising research that branding allows for that consistency and allows for something known as brand recognition. But yes, Brian, you're absolutely right. These are challenges that that have changed over the years, and that the artists who were working with that didn't have the constraints that an artist who would be challenged to work with the same topic now would have.
Ryan, didn't the Lewis Carroll family own the rights to the characters and not technically Macmillan?
No, the illustrations, which is what, of course, that they were using. Well, Macmillan had the rights, still had the rights to the text when these first started, and certainly for Looking Glass. And of course, Tenniel, who died later than Lewis Carroll, his work was still in copyright. In fact, in the early 1930s, I think 32 or 3, when Disney were first planning to do their Alice feature, didn't appear till 1951, but then they actually bought the copyright in the illustrations of Tenniel's illustrations. And in fact, you will find—
Who did they buy them from? Who did they buy the rights from?
Well, they bought the rights from Macmillan as Tenniel's copyrighted imagery. So you will frequently see items like a gramophone recording of the Alice story, which owes nothing to Disney at all, but on the logo, because there are Tenniel pictures featured, it would say copyright Walt Disney Productions, because they own the copyright. Of course, by the time—
I thought Carroll owned the copyrights to the Tenniel artwork, not—
I don't know.
Am I wrong?
In I can't turn on my camera, so it says it's muted. It says Alan Tannenbaum. In 1907, Tenniel actually gave the rights over to Macmillan. So at the time that the copyright of the text was up, and Macmillan wanted to notify everybody that the copyright was up, they also notified everybody, they reinforced that the illustrations were not free and were not in the public domain yet. And in fact, they didn't expire, the copyright didn't expire until the 60s, which was 50 years after Tenniel died. But Macmillan did have the rights.
Did they really though? I mean, could the Carroll's family have argued that they own the rights? The way that Carroll set up the deal, I believe I have letters that Tenniel seems to imply that Carroll owns the rights.
Well, it's always mucky, copyright. However, they did solidify it by Tenniel did give the rights over to Macmillan.
Today,
I thought Tenniel actually acted like Carroll owns the rights to the illustrations, but I have to look at that.
Today, if you're making an illustration for a company or a book or whatever, the publisher owns the illustrations because they have paid you for that privilege. And so unless in the contract it states that the artist retains the copyright, the publisher has that copyright. So for instance, if I want to use images out of a book that I've created wood engravings for, I have to contact the publisher to say, can we, I don't need to be paid for this. Can I use these? Do you mind? And they're going to be used in this context. And usually they ask for a credit of some sort in the reproduction. But it can be very, very complex depending upon the arrangement you have with the creator. And certainly if you take someone's work and then alter it, that becomes another copyright infringement. And there's a category in copyright law, I think it's called fair use. I think it's called fair use maybe in Canada and Great Britain, where that you're allowed to use it if you're making a parody of it. But these are muddy areas, very muddy areas, and can be contested easily in court. Disney being one of those companies that has a lot of lawyers on retainer whose only purpose is to chase down these things. But remember this, never sue the poor. It's always a bad idea, costs a lot of money, and the satisfaction is never there.
I did try to capture at least the best knowledge of it at the time. In the Night Letter, there's an article called Alice in Copyright Land.
So right. order that one, people. That's the newsletter that you need to get.
Right, that's how to
the collector item.
Thanks very much, everyone. There was some discussion about the correct email address for Footstep in the chat. I believe there was an error the first time around with no W at the end. I just want to make sure that's correct.
Yes, There's also Cheshire Cat Press at gmail.com,
Right,
which
okay.
you can reach us both, well, all three of us, Michelle, Andy, and I all have access to that email address. And then there's our personal address. If you Google myself or Andy, you'll find our other email addresses, and many of you already have them. So if you ask another member, you can, and we're happy to respond to your questions and in inquiries about our publications.
And just for the record,
Yes.
don't use the Footsteps email address. If you want to send a personal email to me, it's amalcolm363@gmail.
Yes.
The
And
other one just goes to my company account.
yes, and,
Great.
and questions about the books are readily answered at the Cheshire Cat Press email too.
Linda also posted the personal address in the chat too, folks, so you can scroll back a little bit and those are there.
CheshireCatPress@gmail.com.
Yes,
That's
okay.
good. That's the best one.
The
Watch
Cheshire-
out that there's not too much lead.
There's always lead. I mean, how else do you think we get so mad? Well, I work with lead. It's a thing. But, you know, lead poisoning is caused by ingestion. So no sucking the type in this studio. We do have
Okay.
there are standards, you know.
Thank you for concluding on that cautionary note.
Excellent talk, excellent talk.
Thank you all very much.